At first, it didn't feel like a war. It felt like a bad season. A few broken fences. Fields that didn't grow the way they were supposed to. Mud where crops should have been. American farmers have seen hardship before. Droughts, floods, market crashes. But this was different. This damage wasn't random. It was deliberate, violent, repeating night after night. Every morning told the same story. Cornfields flattened as if a bulldozer had rolled through under the cover of darkness. Fresh trenches carved into the soil. Deep hoof prints pressed so hard into the earth that even tractors struggled to pass. And the smell, a sharp, musky odor that lingered in the air long after sunrise. Giant wild boars. Not one, not two, entire sounders. Dozens at a time. Sometimes hundreds. These weren't the small feral pigs farmers remember from years ago. These were monsters, massive shoulders, thick armor like hide, tusks curved like knives. Animals that had adapted, grown smarter, stronger, and far more aggressive. Trail cameras began capturing what human eyes rarely saw. Boars moving with military precision. Scouts first, then the herd. They would hit the fields fast, eat relentlessly, and disappear before dawn, leaving destruction behind like a battlefield after a raid. For farmers, the financial loss was devastating. Entire seasons wiped out in a single night. Insurance rarely covered the damage. Repairs cost thousands. Some farms, built over generations, were pushed to the edge of collapse. But the damage wasn't just the crops. Cattle were attacked. Water sources were contaminated. Farm equipment was destroyed. And then the attacks got closer. One farmer in Texas described hearing heavy breathing outside his barn at 2 a.m. Another found tusk marks embedded in wooden doors. In several states, farmers reported being charged while checking fields. Forced to climb trucks, fences, anything to get off the ground. This wasn't wildlife anymore. This was invasion. State wildlife agencies confirmed what farmers already knew. The wild boar population had exploded out of control. With no natural predators and an unmatched reproduction rate, numbers were growing exponentially. A single sow could produce dozens of offspring in just a few years. And they were spreading from Texas to Florida, from California to the Carolinas, across farmland, wetlands, forests, and straight into human territory. Local meetings turned tense. Farmers demanded action. Complaints flooded county offices. But regulations moved slowly, and the Boars didn't. So farmers made a choice. If help wasn't coming fast enough, they would fight back. Old hunting rifles were pulled from closets. Traps were welded in barns. Neighbors formed patrol groups. Radios crackled late into the night as men and women guarded their land like soldiers defending a front line. This wasn't sport hunting. This wasn't tradition. This was survival. Because every night the Boars returned, heavier, bolder, more fearless. And with every destroyed field, the message became clearer. This land was no longer uncontested. The war between American farmers and giant wild boars had officially begun. And the next phase would be far more dangerous. Once the war was acknowledged, hesitation disappeared. American farmers understood one brutal truth. Waiting meant losing everything. What began as isolated efforts quickly turned into organized resistance. Farms that once operated independently now shared information like military units. Trail camera footage was exchanged. Movement patterns were mapped. Night schedules were coordinated. The wild boars were no longer just animals in the dark. They were targets. But stopping them was nothing like ordinary pest control. The first traps failed. Standard steel cages bent under the weight of the giants. Heavy doors were ripped open. In some cases, entire traps vanished overnight, dragged away into forests like toys. Farmers realized these boars weren't panicking. They were learning. So the tactics escalated. Massive corral traps were constructed, some covering thousands of square feet, reinforced steel panels, remote-triggered gates, cameras linked to phones, alerting farmers the moment a sounder entered. Nights became sleepless. Men sat in trucks with engines off, breath fogging the windows. Women watched monitors in barns, fingers hovering over trigger switches. Every rustle in the brush tightened nerves. Every distant grunt raised heart rates. Then came the first successful capture. 37 boars trapped in a single enclosure. The relief didn't last long. As farmers approached at dawn, the animals didn't scatter. They charged the fencing. Tusks slammed into steel. Massive bodies collided with such force that panels shook violently. One boar, larger than the rest, smashed its head repeatedly into a post until blood streamed down its face. That was the moment many realized something terrifying. These boars were not afraid of humans anymore. Hunters were called in. Professional teams with thermal scopes, night vision optics, and suppressed rifles joined the effort. Helicopters were used in some regions, chasing sounders across open fields where they could be safely neutralized. In others, trained dogs tracked wounded boars through thick brush, an extremely dangerous task. Several hunters were injured. One man was gored to the thigh after a wounded boar doubled back unexpectedly. Another was knocked unconscious when a charging animal slammed into him at full speed. Vehicles were rammed, tires shredded, engines damaged. The boars fought like they had nothing to lose. And in many ways, they didn't. For every dozen taken down, more seemed to appear. Entire herds shifted territories overnight, adapting to pressure like an invading force-adjusting strategy. Fields that were quiet for weeks suddenly erupted with fresh destruction. Farmers began rotating defenses, moving traps, changing patrol routes, using decoys and bait lines to lure herds away from crops. The stress was relentless. Families ate dinner with rifles leaning against walls. Children were warned not to go outside after sunset. Floodlights were installed around barns and homes, cutting through the darkness where glowing eyes once watched silently. Despite the danger, the fight intensified. Because quitting wasn't an option, crop losses reached millions of dollars in some counties. Small farms folded. Larger operations poured money into defense just to survive another season. The Boars were no longer just destroying land. They were threatening livelihoods, heritage, and generations of work. And still, the numbers didn't drop fast enough. Biologists issued grim warnings. If unchecked, wild boars could permanently alter ecosystems, contaminate water supplies, and spread disease to livestock and humans alike. The war had crossed a point of no return. This was no longer about protecting fields. It was about stopping a biological invasion that was growing stronger by the month. And as farmers prepared for the next phase, one thing became terrifyingly clear. The hardest battles were still ahead, because the Boars were changing, and so was the war. By the time the final phase began, America's war with giant wild boars was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was public, it was urgent, and it was unforgiving. State agencies, farmers, and professional hunters launched coordinated sweeps across thousands of acres. Helicopters thundered low over fields. Thermal scopes scanned forests like glowing maps of movement. Entire sounders were tracked for miles, their paths predicted hours in advance. This wasn't chaos anymore. It was calculated. In some regions, single operations removed over 100 boars in one night. In others, ground teams pushed herds toward control zones, sealing off escape routes with precision. Every step followed strict regulations. Safety, legality, and responsibility remained non-negotiable. Yet even at their weakest, the boars resisted. Old males fought to the last breath. Injured animals doubled back unexpectedly. Dogs were pulled out seconds before leading charges. Hunters learned never to assume a boar was finished, because many weren't. As numbers finally began to fall, the land slowly changed. Fields stopped showing fresh scars overnight. Crops reached harvest without being torn apart. Fences stayed standing. Water sources cleared. For the first time in years, farmers slept through the night. But victory came with a sobering realization. This war could never truly end. Wild boars reproduce faster than almost any large mammal. One missed season, one lapse in pressure, and an invasion could surge back stronger than before. The balance had to be maintained, constantly. Today, America's farmers remain on alert. Trail cameras still glow in the dark. Traps remain set. Patrols continue, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Humans and nature don't coexist through neglect. They coexist through responsibility. This battle was never about dominance. It was about protection, about food security, about defending land that feeds millions. And as long as giant wild boars roam the shadows, this quiet war will continue. Fought not for glory, but for survival. Because on these fields, backing down is not an option.